Can you name this famous church? More than likely you recognized it. This is the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, Spain, that's been under construction for over 100 years. This basilica was only a quarter of the way complete when its architect Gaudi passed away, and he's famed for saying, when people would ask him, "Don't you think this is going to take too long?" he said, "My client's God is not in a hurry." However, big news, it was recently announced that the basilica will finally be complete in the year 2026. Imagine you get the chance to go to the christening of the basilica. It's amazing. The whole city of Barcelona is gathered, and the mood, the attitude of the crowd is one of disinterest. You hear people saying, "Well, it's not that big of a deal. What's all the fuss about? I mean, it's finally constructed, but buildings are being constructed all the time. The design isn't that impressive." Well, you would want to shake these people to their senses. The Sagrada Familia is an almost miraculous accomplishment. To make such claims of ingratitude is absurd. It's a blatant injustice to the masterful vision of the architect Gaudi. I would propose that in the same way, us, the recipients of the foundational truths of Western Christian thought, can have the same attitude of disinterest, of just taking it for granted, the arduous development and refinement of the truths that have shaped our culture. Dave Verbum reminds us, there's a growth in the understanding of the realities and the words which have been handed down. This happens through the contemplation and study made by believers who treasure these things in their hearts, through a penetrating understanding of the spiritual realities which they experience, and through the preaching of those who have received through episcopal succession the sure gift of truth. For as the centuries succeed one another, the church constantly moves forward toward the fullness of divine truth, until the words of God reach their complete fulfillment in her. Today we're going to look at how two foundational Greek thinkers have aided the church, have aided Christianity in the ability to articulate the truths of our faith. Those two thinkers are Plato and Aristotle, and we can see how their thinking was reimagined and elevated into the thinking of St. Augustine of Hippo and St. Thomas Aquinas. But first, do we even need their contribution? Can't we just believe everything by faith? John Paul II, in his encyclical Fides et Ratio, reminds us, faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of the truth. All truth originates in God. Therefore, the truth of faith and the truth of reason cannot contradict or contrast each other. Therefore, if we find truth in philosophical ways of thinking, especially those in the ancient Greeks, we can trust that all truth originates from God, and we can use that to articulate our faith. St. Clement of Alexandria explains, just as God prepared the Jewish people through the law and the prophets, partially until the fullness of revelation was revealed in the incarnation, so was God preparing Greek thinkers through reason, rationality, and philosophy. So let's take a look at the first Greek thinker we'll be discussing, Plato. Plato was a student of Socrates, the author of the first complete philosophical manuscripts. So a lot of what we know about the pre-Socratic thinkers comes from the writing of Plato. And really cool, when a restless young St. Augustine found himself gripped in the dualism of Manichaeism and struggling with the truths of the Christian faith, it was Neoplatonic philosophy, so philosophy rooted in the teachings of Plato, that aided him in understanding the truths of the Christian faith. Now, Plato's main contribution to philosophy is his theory of the forms. He was responding to the static monism of Parmenides. Everything is one. Everything is being. There is no change. Change is an illusion. Versus the dynamic monism of Heraclitus, where everything is changed. There is nothing static. There's nothing lasting. Everything's changed, and therefore we can't talk about objective truth because everything's in constant flux. Plato groundbreakingly provides a solution in dualism. The perceived world that we experience is changing and illusory, participating in a distinct perfect changes realm of the forms. In the realm of epistemology, consequently, the source of true knowledge is not in our sensory world, but all things are pointing towards the real object of the forms. To explain how an individual moves from shadows of the sensory world to the real, Plato uses the analogy of a cave. So, in this famed example, Plato has us imagine prisoners bound in a cave, observing the shadows of objects cast on the wall in the midst of a great fire. These shadows, where people are carrying objects back and forth and the shadows are being cast on the wall, are the first stage of knowledge for Plato. They are images, representations. This is why Plato does not like arts, because they're the least form of knowledge. But once a prisoner is freed to see the puppeteers, to see real objects, to see the great fire, this is the second level of knowledge before journeying outside the cave, where one is first blinded by the change, by the light of the good, the sun, the form of the forms. But as one's eyes grow accustomed, there's the ability to see the third level of knowledge in shadows and reflections, and finally real objects themselves, and the good is able to be known. The forms are able to be known. The Platonic contribution to epistemology is his theory of recollection. Knowledge in the Platonic sense, it's basically remembering, reminiscence. All are born possessing knowledge, and our realization of that knowledge is contingent on our discovery of it. This is because the soul once dwelt in the perfect, changeless realm of the forms, but through a process of constant reincarnation, we've been cast down into the sensible world of becoming. Plato says, there's nothing to prevent someone who recollects one thing only from discovering all other things, so long as he is brave and does not grow tired of seeking. For seeking and learning, therefore, consist wholly in recollection. This is most famously demonstrated in Plato's work, Meno, where Socrates is showing that one can't ask about what one doesn't know, since they would already know it, and they have no need to ask. This is called the learner's paradox, and Plato's trying to illustrate that we already have this innate a priori knowledge that we just need to remember. What does this have to do about Christian thought? Well, now let's discuss St. Augustine of Hippo, who incorporated Neoplatonist thinking into the Christian faith to synthesize faith and reason. Aquinas summarized Augustine's relationship with Plato when he wrote, "Whenever Augustine, who was imbued with the doctrines of the Platonists, found in their writings anything consistent with the faith, he adopted it, and whatever he found contrary to the faith, he amended." One key way where Augustine transferred Platonic thought is the Platonic forms. Augustine used this to help us understand how ideas are in the divine mind. So Augustine transferred Plato's forms where they're no longer a separate world, there's no longer this dualism, the forms subsisting, but the forms are now in the divine mind in Augustinian epistemology, where they can preserve their original ontological, epistemological, and moral role as being the principles of being. Just as the form of the good for Plato is the form which allows all other forms to be known. So the analogy of the sun gives the light for which we know all things, so we can see all things. So Augustine uses this to explain the Christian God. He takes the form of the forms, the sun, and he says, this is God. This God is the eternal and unchangeable light that allows the human soul to make judgments. How does this impact epistemology? Well, in the Platonic system, an individual can't arrive at the form of a thing through experience. For example, it doesn't matter how many videos you watch like this, you're never going to experience the perfect form of a video, although I hope this one gets close. Therefore, for Plato, one must have had contact with this perfect form in a prior life, because we can know the form of a perfect video. Therefore, knowledge is innate. It's prior to experience. We're just remembering something that we've already had contact with. So Augustine takes this, discarding Plato's claims of reincarnation of the soul, and says that it's God that is the perfect form that makes intelligible ideas that are necessary, eternal, and perfect that we can never arrive at through experience. He makes those present and intelligible in our minds. Phaser explains, it is extra divine assistance without which the intellect, relying merely on its own capacities, would be unable to grasp the necessity, eternity, and perfection of the forms. This process, which Augustine is describing, is referred to as divine illumination. So to clarify, it's not the divine ideas that individuals see, but by the divine ideas that individuals come to know truth. So we can see how elevated and reimagined in Augustinian epistemology, the forms themselves are lifted up. They no longer subsist, they're corrected. They're no longer in exaggerated realism, but they find their home in the divine intellect. The second great figure, which is reimagined and elevated in Christian epistemology, is Aristotle, whom St. Thomas Aquinas simply referred to as the philosopher. Aristotle was a student of Plato, and he served philosophy by correcting Plato's theory of the forms. He brought the forms down into nature. He basically raised the problem of interaction. Like, okay, there's two worlds. How does the perfect changes world of the forms interact with the material world? And his solution was that forms were immanent. No longer subsisting in a perfect changeless realm, the forms exist in objects themselves. This is called holomorphism, in which form and matter are two co-principles that make a substance. And for Aristotle, it's a substance's form that shapes matter into specific things. Without form, matter could not exist, and likewise, without matter, the form would have nothing to shape. Aristotle is epistemologically a moderate realist, meaning universals exist in things. They're real, universals are real, but they don't subsist in a second realm. They're not subsisting in themselves, they subsist in substances. Okay, how does this change how we know things? So for Plato, all knowledge is remembering. This world isn't real, don't trust sensory knowledge. Help it lead you to remember the perfect forms. Aristotle rejects this theory of recollection. He accounts for the ability to know universals through the power of abstraction. Abstraction is where the soul, experiencing particulars, abstracts the universal essence of these particulars. So, for example, throwing it back to the example of watching videos, Aristotle would say, by watching particular videos, we can grasp the universal essence of a video. How does this process occur? While Plato distrusts sensory knowledge, Aristotle argues that human knowledge begins with sense perception. For Aristotle, the soul possesses powers, one of these being the intellect, and the intellect receives sensory knowledge in its passive capacity and makes them intelligible. And because the soul is the form of the body, rather than a ghost trapped in the body for Plato, it acts with the body to attain knowledge through the senses. This is referred to as soft empiricism, where knowledge begins at sense experience, but can go beyond that into rationality. Another big thing for Aristotle is causality. So really simply, in order to know what a thing is, you have to know its causes. There's four causes: the material cause, or what it's made out of; the formal cause, what it's made into, so like its pattern or shape; the efficient cause, what made it; and the final cause, which is the reason, the purpose for which it was made. If you're an Aquinas fan, this is going to be really familiar to you. So we can see how Aquinas is going to take into his system of epistemology a lot of this, because in the words of St. Thomas Aquinas, every truth, wherever it's spoken, is from the Holy Spirit. So he takes a majority of what Aristotle says and his epistemology, discarding the elements that are not compatible with the Christian faith. So how does he do this? Well, Aquinas adopts this doctrine of abstraction given by Aristotle. So Aquinas says that humans were born like a blank slate, like a clean tablet on which nothing is written, and we receive forms from sense knowledge, and the passive intellect receives them, makes them intelligible by the active intellect. The big question is, does Aquinas reject the theory of divine illumination that Augustine established, how he remixed Platonic thought? The answer is sort of. He says, from the words of Augustine, we are given to understand that truth is not entirely to be looked for from the senses, for we require the light of agent intellect, through which we unchangeably cognize the truth in changeable things, and we distinguish the things themselves from the likeness of things. Therefore, While Aquinas reveres the valuable elements found in Augustinian divine illumination, he largely replaces it with the power of the Aristotelian agent intellect. Placing greater confidence on the intellectual power than the soul, the angelic doctor writes that human beings possess a sufficient capacity for thoughts on their own without any need of new illumination from God. Now, this doesn't mean that Aquinas is saying that the human intellect does not need God, but rather the divine intellect is the pure act of being that initiates all knowledge. So the agent intellect bears a light that originates from the divine ideas, and that likeness is the foundational source of all knowledge. So in a sense, there is still divine illumination, where God is the principal actor of all knowledge, but it would not be as immanently described as Augustine describes, where it's the divine ideas themselves that are actively helping us know new knowledge. Also for Aquinas, of course, he adopts Aristotelian causality, and this is a major way in which he argues from reason that we can know God. So he takes us into his theological epistemology. His second argument for God is a great example. He uses the example of efficient causality. So for example, previously in this video, we explained that an efficient cause is what brings something into existence. So me, I'm making this video, so I'm the cause of the effect of this video. So the video isn't capable of making itself. Self-causation isn't a thing. So consequently for Aquinas, anytime someone witnesses an effect, they should deduce a cause. Every time you see a video, you should deduce, okay, someone made this video. So in his argument, he states, now to take away the cause is to take away the effect. Therefore, if there be no first cause among efficient causes, there will be no ultimate nor any intermediate cause. But if in efficient causes it is possible to go into affinity, there will be no first efficient cause. Neither will there be an ultimate effect, nor any intermediate efficient causes, all of which is plainly false. Therefore, it is necessary to admit a first efficient cause, to which everyone gives the name of God. So this is so cool to see how the thinking of an ancient Greek philosopher is brought into the Christian thought to explain how our reason can arrive at the existence of God. So by revisiting the epistemological opinions of Augustine and Aquinas, it's clear that the contributions of Plato and Aristotle have been very helpful, have been instrumental in articulating what we believe as Christians. During the time these Greeks, Plato and Aristotle, were living, there was this group of men called the Sophists who proposed that truth is subjective, malleable, just use it to make money, to twist reality. Truth is whatever you want it to be. And it was thinkers like Plato and Aristotle who contended, on the contrary, that truth is objective and intelligible, thus preserving the study of knowledge. And today we can see how this same spirit of sophistry, this same spirit of skepticism, can we really know the truth? Is it worth it? Cynicism, this like despair, nihilism, we can't know how to live. We don't know the answer. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how to live good lives. The same spirit threatens human confidence to know the truth. But St. John Paul II reminds Christians it is necessary that we have the reason to articulate the knowledge of our faith in concept and argument. And we can see how the works of Plato and Aristotle give Christians countless tools to articulate things such as first principles, universals, abstraction, the powers of the soul, causality, and so much more. So, in conclusion, with the help of these two great thinkers, baptized, we recognize these thinkers knowing partially the truth, but baptized into the fullness of the truth, revealed in the incarnation, revealed in Christ in his church, Christians today can help skeptics see that being the reality, the truth that we live in, it's not subjective or unintelligible or leading to despair, but it is more comparable to the marvel, the awe-inspiring accomplishments of the Sagrada Familia.